Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Jack from emailsthatsell.com. We're covering outsourcing and automation in today's episode. It's the perfect cast if you want fresh leads in your inbox without doing any of the work. Now, side note, I've been sick for the past 3 days, so forgive me if I sound a bit less energetic in this episode. P.S. Throughout this episode, just notice how some of the most time-consuming and challenging parts of cold email are actually the easiest to automate. Enjoy.
Today we got an episode where we wanted to touch on automation and how can you automate the whole process of cold email.
Yeah, it's sort of the final piece of the puzzle once you have a working outbound email system in place. This is where you focus on removing yourself from the equation. So you get responses coming in without you working on finding prospects, writing email copy, all of the systems, so to speak.
Yeah, and of course there is some automation when you use a tool like QuickMail in order to send the emails and automate the follow-up and maybe handle the replies, but they are way more than that. So maybe as a recap, Jack, can you let us know what are all the pieces involved into a cold email campaign?
Sure. So first thing that you would want to do, you've got to have prospects. And again, this is assuming that you've already done your research, you understand who you're going after, but you need to have a system in place that will produce lists of quality prospects. Next, you need, and I guess within prospecting, Jeremy, there's a couple different steps involved, from cleaning the prospects, removing bad email addresses, enriching the list with some merge tags you might like to use. But let's call it prospecting. Next is the outreach. That involves writing the email copy, getting the email sent out. In my case, it's with QuickMail, and also writing A/B test variations, deleting the tests, and sort of optimizing. And finally, there's the reply handling. So that's like the third major group that you want to focus on automating. This is everything that happens after a reply comes in the door.
That's a lot of steps. Which one can be automated and maybe which one can also be easily automated when starting?
I suppose the right way, or the way I like to think of automation, is tackling the repetitive, easy tasks that suck up a lot of your time every week first. This doesn't mean that once you address these tasks that are repetitive, it doesn't mean that you'll have a completely automated outbound email system. But it does mean that you've removed one or two different tasks that you find yourself repeatedly doing. So if that's the case, I've found that cleaning up my list of prospects is one example of a weekly task that comes up so frequently, and it takes quite a bit of time. This was the first place that I added a little bit of automation so that I no longer had to do that on a week-by-week basis.
Can you walk us through exactly specifically what that means and how people can then start implementing that?
Sure. So the most common example, and I'm certain that anyone listening to the show who has sent cold emails to B2B companies, they're probably tackling this problem already, but you've got to clean up the company name before you send out an email to that person, right? If you're going to mention the company name in a campaign, it better not say company, LLC, or it shouldn't say company, Inc., incorporated. There's a correct way to drop in a company name, and it's depending where you're getting your leads from, you're going to have to do some manual cleanup on those company names, right? So that is, to me, the best place to start automation because it's repetitive and it's pretty easy to hand this off to somebody else who can do this for you every week. And all it takes is just writing a manual for the process and paying somebody to walk through that manual and get it done just like you would. So a couple of tips here. If you have a list of company names, let's say, that you need to clean up, go ahead and do it yourself one last time. But as you're going through the process, start writing down the rules. So step 1, open the spreadsheet. Step 2, identify the column with the company name. Step 3, find anything that with LLC and remove it, and so on. And that way you've got a sort of step-by-step process that whoever you bring in to do this for you is handling the job exactly as you would.
Yeah, to find someone like that, I know a lot of people had success with Upwork. You can also look maybe for Fiverr. Do you know any other sites that people may look at for finding people who are available to do those repetitive tasks and following a manual of instructions?
Yeah, I'm a fan of Upwork. I would start there. Between $5 and $10 US, you should be able to find a very capable English speaker who can take care of your list cleanup process.
Do you have any other easy win or quick win that people can get? You know, those sort of like low-hanging fruits?
Yeah, there's one other that you can try here. And it's a little bit more involved, but it's kind of fun if you get it set up. This is especially good if you've already found the right virtual assistant to help you with stuff. So what I like to do is if I have a list of prospects without the email addresses, right? Then what I have found really helpful is writing a manual that helps my VA learn how to take my list of just people and company names and upload that to, let's say, hunter.io, extract the email addresses for those leads, clean them up then with Bright Verify, and then upload that to QuickMail. So I've basically taken 3 steps out of the prospecting work away. So now, as long as I have a list of prospects, even if I don't have the emails, my team is able to use tools to find the email addresses, and then taking it one step forward, they'll clean the list, make sure it's ready to go, no undeliverable emails, and then they'll go into my QuickMail account and upload it accordingly. And this I've just found saves a couple hours a week per account, but it's relatively straightforward to write a manual for using these tools. And I think if you've got the right person already, go for it. It should save you a little bit more time each week.
Nice. One more thing I'd like to say actually about automation is one thing I learned from you, Jack, is to automate the reply handling. And that is always something that I've thought like, oh, it's difficult, I have to do it, you know, those sort of things. But then you blew me away by how easy and simple the process is actually to handle replies and schedule calls automatically without you being involved. I find like super fascinating and much easier than I anticipated. Can you talk a little bit of that and how the process could go for if I want to outsource my handling replies?
This is a good one. Also saved quite a bit of time and gotten the results we were hoping for. So here's sort of the backstory. If you've got a cold email campaign running, you're going to get replies, hopefully, if you're doing your job right. Once you get those replies, each reply needs to be followed up on, even if it's something short, like, okay, great, here's where you can book a time, or something more involved where you're sending more details, you're giving them something they requested, and eventually moving them towards the next step of the sales funnel until they close, right? So luckily, a lot of the replies that you'll get are typically pretty similar. I've found that most replies can be put into a couple different buckets. So you might have some replies that say, okay, let's get a call scheduled. And those kinds of leads should get emails that say something like, okay, great, here's where you can book a call. But what if you had your own sequence pre-built out in a tool like QuickMail so that anytime someone wrote you back and said, yeah, this sounds interesting, I'd like to speak with you about it. What if you could just add them automatically to that sequence that fires off emails and follow-ups specifically for leads who want to book a call? Like that completely eliminates the need to follow up with that prospect manually. At that point, maybe with a little bit of customization on a few touches, you've essentially got that follow-up process handled. So I consider that 95% automated and out of your hands, so to speak.
One other thing I like with that idea of starting a new sequence on someone, especially if you start it with QuickMail, you could CC, your x.ai address, and that way your sequence could look like, hey, awesome, let's schedule a call. I put Lori CC'd and she's going to arrange the meeting, which I find is like super cool for those sort of things.
I completely agree. And here's what gets me excited is two things. Within, let's say, Gmail, I'm able to just drag that conversation into a label and then QuickMail can follow up accordingly, right? Like I don't even have to go into QuickMail and start the sequence. But my favorite part is I have a team that checks my inboxes for me. So all they have to do then is just drag it to the appropriate folder and the follow-up is handled, which basically saves hours of following up and taking replies and getting them to phone calls, demos, all of the stuff that we're hoping our leads will do. So you can see here there's sort of layers to this automation game. The first one being just write a manual of what you're doing and pay someone to follow the steps in your manual, to what we just talked about, which uses a bit of automation tools like QuickMail plus a virtual team that can manage an inbox and follow up just by dragging it to a label. To me, it's beautiful. But here's the thing. There's going to be some replies that don't fit in these buckets that you've created follow-up sequences for. So maybe someone will ask an odd question or they'll have an objection that you might need to overcome. And if that's the case, that's fine. You just follow up with them manually until it comes to a point where you've gotten that question enough times that you decide it's appropriate to build out sort of this pre-follow-up sequence for it. And again, it comes back to identifying where the biggest time, I don't like to use the word like time wasters are because they're certainly important, but find out where most of your time is spent and think about how you can either bring someone else in to take some of the effort off of your plate, or even better, bring some automation tools like X.AI is definitely worth looking into. Especially, that's a cool trick, using QuickMail to CC your X.AI assistant. There's some clever hacks here that can save a ton of time.
I'm wondering, actually, Jack, where do you think the limit or the choice is where it comes to decide, is that going to be a tool that automate my stuff, or is that going to be a human that automate my stuff? Do you have some sort of like rules that you follow? Or
Yeah, I do. Tools are excellent for everything except for creative work. So for example, if there's a common response that you keep seeing day in and day out in your cold email campaign, it's easy to have a tool like QuickMail say, okay, this is the sequence they should go on and fire it off. But if that task requires a little bit of creativity, such as, ooh, this is an oddball response, I don't have a pre-built sequence for this, and there's no tool that can craft an email campaign on the fly, for example. Obviously, that needs to be done by a human.
Okay, so let's assume that this is such a repetitive task and this is, either that stuff or that stuff. And it's really like black and white and a computer can figure it out. Then you will basically either build a tool or find a tool that exists to do it, right?
Yeah, like a perfect example is using Bright Verify to make sure you're sending to deliverable email addresses.
Perfect. Now, the trick question here comes to, what about if it's like an automation can get it right in 90% of the case or 80% of the case? At what point do you decide, okay, let's go with a tool, or no, that's not good enough, let's move to a human?
I love your question, Jeremy. And the answer is use both. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using a tool that can get you 80% of the way there, and then having a virtual assistant say, hey, just go ahead and comb through this output. I want to make sure that it's 100% ready to go before we send it out.
Love it. In fact, that's what you're doing with cleaning up with the Comma LLC, right? You actually get an automation first that fills all your spreadsheet with the exact name of the company as best as you can. And then you have like a second pass, a human actually just checking the thing. It's a bit like PayPal when they managed to finally crack down fraud. They tried the whole automation, they tried the whole human, and both of them were not like working until they actually combined the both of them, which is like the automation check flags and then the human like double check. But I'm not sure it's a good example because PayPal really sucks anyway in the end.
Tell me about it. Okay, so one just concrete example of so that you can really grasp what I'm mentioning here with using both a tool and a team. Let's go back to this company name, Task, just because it's familiar by now. You can write a Google Sheet function that basically says anytime you see LLC or Inc., just delete that. And you can run it for the entire column of company names. And for the most part, that will clean up and make all the company names pretty much ready to send. It's not perfect though, or at least I haven't seen a function that does that with 100% accuracy. So that's a great example of a task that you would want to use some automation. So run the formula down the column and then have a team member go through, and it's going to be much faster for that team member just to do checking as opposed to the entire process from scratch. So at the end of the day, it's going to save you some money and your work will also be returned quicker and with less inaccuracies.
Makes sense. What about things that are really hard or you shouldn't outsource? Do you got any idea here?
Yeah, so the last thing I believe that can be outsourced within a cold email campaign is the email content itself. In fact, I haven't figured out the formula, so to speak, of how to outsource writing email copy, with the exception of hiring a amazing cold email writer. And by the way, I still write all our campaigns. It's not something that I'm in a rush to outsource, just because I know how important the email content is. And as a copywriter, I'm a bit wary of hiring another one just because, I don't know, it's just difficult. I'm not entirely sure if there's a fix besides just going to a person with a proven track record of writing cold emails. That's probably the only way, and you'll pay for it. But if that's the last piece of the puzzle for automating your process, then it may be worth it.
Yeah, and 2 points on this one. The first one is this is a one-off, right? You're actually just writing a template for a specific audience, for a specific campaign or settings or context that you have. So it's not like if someone needs to write an email for every of your prospects. So sure, it's a difficult creative part that you may not be able to outsource, but still it's a sort of like one-off. Is a Pavarotti thing, like you record a CD once and everyone just listens to the same CD, right? It's not singing for everyone.
I actually have a different view on that. So my segments were humongous, or not even humongous, but let's say I just had a segment that would see the same email sequence and a lot of prospects in that segment. Then I would say, yeah, you're right. I can pay once to get the sequence written and then I'm done. However, I love to make my prospect groups really narrow, and I write modified email sequences for each different kind of group I'm in.
I love that. It makes total sense. So quick follow-up question for you. On average, for a client, how many sequences do you think you're writing? And I know we're diverging a little bit from automation, but I'm just curious to know about this question.
That's a good question. I think it depends a little bit like how long we've been running the campaign. But for example, to get things started, we usually take 2 or 3 different groups of people to go after, and we may segment those down a little bit further and actually test between a couple different sequences. So I'm not saying that each sequence is radically different, but it could be that there's 5 different sequences getting launched in the first week or something. And then after that, depending on the traction, then we sort of continue from there, adding a few different segments and testing out. So it can be a lot, especially if we're going after really narrow groups. Sometimes, even if there's only 70 prospects in a group, that's justifiable to write them their own sort of sequence. So it can be quite a hefty amount of sequences.
Makes sense. And then you also have variations and A/B testing that you're going to use. So
yeah,
that makes sense. All right.
And don't get me wrong, though. If you're listening, it can definitely be outsourced. I'm just sharing one person's opinion of the challenges faced, but there are plenty of people that have outsourced it with great results. So if that's something you're looking to do, have no fear.
I guess the last point that we can touch on is what about automating the entire cold email outreach?
Yes.
How's that compared to actually just doing it yourself?
So when you talk about outsourcing the entire thing, easiest, probably the most expensive way to do it is by hiring an agency. And they will be able to, quote unquote, outsource all of it for you. And assuming they do a great job for you, your outbound email campaigns have been completely automated and you're there. But like I said, it's probably the most expensive option for automating your own cold email campaigns. But if you're just starting out it may be worth it to run a few pilot campaigns yourself. See if you've already got customers and you have a lot of data that tells you you're reaching out, you know exactly who to reach out to, you know that these customers stick around for a while, they're worth quite a bit to your company. Then there's not a whole lot of guesswork involved, and those are the best places to start a cold email campaign, because if you can look at your customer roster and say, yep, we know that these kinds of companies are buying and they're happy, these are the ones we want to go after, you've got a lot of firepower, so to speak, so that whoever does start up your cold email campaign has a lot to work with and they know exactly who to target, and hopefully they can learn from some of your marketing campaigns to figure out the best things to write in the emails.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jack. All right, today, Jack shared with us some of his secret sauce on how to do more with less by using automation in his cold email process. So here are 3 takeaways from this episode. First, start with the low-hanging fruits. Find most repetitive tasks that consume a lot of time and energy and outsource them using a software, a human, or actually both. Second, outsourcing the first reply handling may not be as complicated as one may think and may prove to be one of the biggest gains, actually. Have this process written down and see if you can outsource this to someone who could move your prospect further down the sales cycles. That could be done by starting a sequence, for example, for scheduling an appointment. And finally, if you haven't started anything yet, but have some good reasons to think that cold email could work for you, why not considering working with an agency to start a few pilots or get things started faster?
Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high vibe by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher or Tuning, that works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast.
So they can send awesome emails.
And make everyone's inbox a better place. Thanks.